is a disease. It infected my brother Chris. My hypothesis, there's a cure.
Your daughter has a very disturbing obsession.
What obsession?
Death.
Just think about your brother. You didn't have the chance to bury him. I just wish I could catch who took his body.
Death is the disease that broke my family. I'm sick of seeing it.
What Jada be running around here calling you some type of mad scientist?
Can I hang out with my friend?
What friend?
Chris.
Where did you see him?
He talks to me. Ew. He's here.
What are you doing?
I didn't mean for this to happen.
They called him a monster, and he believed it. Death is a disease. There's a cure.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Fresh Cuts. This is Mike. Joining me, as always, it's Mr. Venom. What's up, Venom?
Greetings and salutations, readers of the Human Prometheus. Yeah, I'm doing pretty well, Mike. How you doing?
Pretty good. Another Monday down, and it's time to talk another horror movie. So, at least at that level, I'm doing well. Also, joining us, it's Don and Ellie. What's up, Don?
Hey, what's going on? Always happy to be here.
Cool. All right, so this week we are covering a movie that just recently hit VOD. I believe it was originally released on the Vudu service, which I don't know if they're owned by another company that would put it in different places, but I know for sure it has been available on Vudu for a couple of weeks, and that would be The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. If that title kind of strikes you as like, whoa, okay, that's an aggressive title. Yeah, I mean, you'll understand it with the setup of the movie, I guess. So let me take the synopsis off IMDb. Vicaria is a brilliant teenager who believes death is a disease that can be cured. After the brutal murder of her brother, she embarks on a dangerous journey to bring him back to life. All right, with that synopsis, it kind of brings other movies to mind, and maybe there's bits and pieces of those elements of other movies in here, but does that make for a good movie? Let's find out. We'll start our general thoughts with Mr. Venom. What did you think of The Angry Girl and Her Monster?
This was an interesting movie. Like, I feel like what they did in the film was really well done. I just feel like it needed more. My biggest complaint about this movie is going to be the fact that it's advertised as like a Frankenstein style monster movie. But when you actually watch it, the whole Frankenstein quote unquote elements of it are almost secondary. Like it almost seems like the message of this movie is that the real horror is drug addiction and gang violence, which, legitimately it is. I mean, this movie is definitely, kind of I wouldn't go so far as to say character study, but definitely a case study of someone trying to live their best life, while living in the ghetto or the housing projects or whatever you want to go with. So Overall, I did enjoy the film. There's some really good performances here. I think our lead, Vicaria, played by Leia De Leon Hayes, did a great job. You know, she's equal parts intelligent, but still very fascinated with things that she doesn't quite understand. I did have some issues with her character, which I'll go over, later on in our walkthrough. But for the most part, I liked her. Her performance, or her relationship with a lot of the characters in the movie, be they friends, family, or enemies, I thought were very organic and believable. It's interesting that they call this movie The Angry Black Girl because, I mean, yeah, she's angry because of her lot in life and some of the things that have happened to members of her family. But it seems like there's other characters in this movie that are way angrier than her. Like Kango and Jamal are literally endlessly angry. They feel like they're just 24/7 angry. Um, and like I said, I'm not necessarily complaining that this is more of a gritty, life on the street type film as opposed to a straight up, gory horror film. There is still horror here. Don't get me wrong. There's body snatching. There's, experimentation. Granted, maybe not to the levels that most genre fans would like to see, but still fairly enjoyable. Like I don't really have a lot of negative things to say about the movie. The score is good. The cinematography is serviceable. It's good direction. Some good editing. As I said, the performances pretty much top to bottom are all great. I thought her dad was awesome. I thought Vicaria's dad was really, really. I mean, the first time we meet him is at school when he's been called in for a parent-teacher conference, and his reply is very not what you would expect from a dad who just got dragged out of his job to go to a parent-teacher conference at school. So instantly, you kind of warm up to him and see that, ultimately Vicaria is his last child left, his last family, a direct family anyway, left. So he's trying to do his part to make sure that her life is as good as possible, working 2 jobs, trying to make sure that she's staying out of trouble with drugs and everything else, despite his own addiction that he's battling throughout the film, which, might taint your opinion of him, but ultimately, addiction is a very human thing. It's not just drug addiction. There's all sorts of addictions that we all fall victim to. So, like I said, he's a likable character who's a little flawed. But overall, this is an enjoyable film. I can't imagine it's going to be in my top 10. It's not currently. Like I said, some good performances, a pretty good story. Interesting the way that they actually utilize the human Prometheus in this story. It's almost like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein doesn't exist in this universe, and she's actually writing the human Prometheus, because when they show it in the movie, it's a notebook that she's actually writing in. It's not the novel by Mary Shelley. So it's kind of interesting that they're going about it at that angle. But overall, yeah, I just really wish there was a little bit more horror set pieces in here, a little bit more horror action. The body count is pretty low in this movie. Honestly, the body count in this movie is higher for the human characters, the gang members, I mean, they're going around shooting and killing people, bashing the head of cops and whatnot, whereas our monster, our quote unquote monster, really doesn't have that high a body count in the film. So yeah, I just wish that there was a little bit more horror to be had here, but overall, still an enjoyable film worth watching. I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, let's go over to Dawn. What were your general thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm kind of right where Venom is with this one. Not really as horror based as I would want it to be. I do like the setup. I do think it's fun. Or not necessarily like, this isn't really a fun party movie, but more just like it fun enough for what it's trying to do, trying to show, her lot in life, all the, various mishaps that occur growing up, and, the life that she leaves, and, trying to use this as a means of getting out of it. All of that is fine enough for what it is, but yeah, just I felt myself kind of just losing interest with this one the longer it goes on, realizing it was more of an urban horror film about, or fantasy drama kind of a feel about how her life is trying to screw her over, and all the various little tangents that arrive from growing up in that kind of an environment. And it just kind of left me just not really that invested in what was happening. Probably by about like the half hour mark, and it really wasn't about her being a Dr. Frankenstein and trying to bring this thing back to life, because it's already alive by that point. I mean, it's not about whether or not she can bring it back to life. It's she's already done it. The thing is up and about, and it's already it's attacked others, so there's already the idea that the thing's out there. But yeah, other than that, it never really invested. It never really brought me in. It never really did much for me. Yeah, I'm trying not to spoil it, but I mean, it's not bad by any means. I mean, it looks great. There's great performances. She does a great job as a this teenage rebel that's fighting for what she wants, and trying to escape her lot in life. But yeah, just it wasn't as horror as I wanted it to be. It wasn't as horrific or macabre as I wanted it to be. And yeah, the human villains in this are far more menacing than what the actual creature is, which I wasn't interested in. And yeah, it's just another film about grief and trauma and trying to overcome that. And yeah, I just was giving up as the film was going on. But yeah, it's still watchable, I think, by what you would constitute good filmmaking. But overall, yeah, just not a horror, overplayed genre tropes that I'm just really losing interest in. Just kind of undid this one for me. And yeah, it just the longer it went on, the less interested I was in it. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
All right. What is this? I know it's at least 2 weeks in a row, maybe 3 weeks in a row that I kind of feel similar. I think it was I would still call it good, but it had the potential to be better. I thought it was hopefully building towards something a little more grand than we ended up getting. I thought the horror was sprinkled into the story. We had bits and pieces throughout the movie, but we never really had like a culmination of anything in the third act. Obviously, this movie probably reminds people of similar stuff. I think Venom already referenced Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I was thinking almost like a little bit of May, a little bit of Re-Animator, a little bit of Excision, even just because of a lot of the way she's thinking and approaching about things. But I think the movie, it touches on a lot of things, but it feels like it holds back from really going for it at certain moments. I thought there was some really good gore and like the aftermath of a kill, but the kill itself was off screen. That was a little disappointing, because earlier in the movie, when we first get the monster, they show like a near death take place. So I figured, okay, from that point on, we're gonna get some more carnage. But I don't know, they kind of dial it back, and maybe that's just because of the style of movie they were making. They didn't want that to overshadow the other elements. But hey, if you're making a movie that's labeled horror, I would hope at one point in the movie you do dial it up. But with that said, as a movie itself, I still did enjoy it. I liked the kind of story, the subtext of why, like, in her situation, I understand like why she would kind of have the attitude of death and see death itself as a disease that she's trying to cure, because she's growing up around a lot of senseless death. So she's trying to come up with a solution. As far as like the mind of a teenager, a younger teenager, she seems the best they could probably compartmentalize that in their head. So I did appreciate the setup, the setting. I like the different characters she interacts with, kind of like the journey she takes to the movie. But I agree. I just wish the horror elements were ramped up a little bit more. But I thought everyone did a good job. And yeah, I agree. It's probably not going to be like a top 10 type movie, but I could see it maybe getting an honorable mention. Just depends what else we get the rest of the year. It's definitely the type of movie that I would like to see like what's next from the writer or director, because I think this is like this type of movie is definitely something off of for the future to see like what they have next, what ideas are spinning in their head for future horror movies if they decide to stick with the genre. But yeah, I just kind of stick with like kind of like that good like a 6.5, kind of like what 2023's been for most of the year, at least in my opinion. It's just kind of that's just must be the theme of this year, I guess, outside of like a few movies. But yeah, I guess I can leave it at that for general thoughts. Venom, I'll throw it back to you if you want to add some more.
Another movie that this one reminded me of was Pet Sematary. Did anybody get Pet Sematary vibes in the third act? Specifically,
Kind
when
of.
she makes,
Kind of, yeah.
right. Yeah, she makes a decision right at the end of the movie that's very Louis Creed. I mean, it's almost carbon copy what Louis Creed, even right down to the dialogue, even at times. So, you know, there's obviously a lot of homages in this movie. Obviously, stuff like Frankenstein and May, Depraved, movies like that are going to be more the obvious ones. But yeah, if you dig deeper, yeah, there's going to be a lot more homages that especially hardcore horror fans that have been in the genre for multiple decades are going to recognize. So, you know, and that's not always a bad thing. Like I don't mind that the movie reminded me of Pet Sematary.
I was wondering if like the fact that this isn't really a spoiler because it doesn't matter for the story. That's the only reason I'm saying it right now is that the fact that she hooked up that Ken doll, I was like, is that a homage to Weird Science? Because in this movie, I didn't see what the function of the doll was. Where in Weird Science, they hooked up the doll because I guess we're supposed to believe in Weird Science. The doll kind of turned into Lisa, but in this one, I was like, what's the actual function of hooking up the Ken doll? So maybe that was just like a homage.
It must have been, yeah, because there's no actual function that it could possibly serve. I mean, it's not like she could test the flow of electricity through a dead body using a doll. It's not like the doll's going to come back to life. At least not in this universe. The doll's not going to come to life. So, I think it was just a visual cue more than anything. That or she was just trying to figure out where to put the contacts, like with the diodes and whatnot. You know, where exactly she was going to put them. Again, I don't know how the doll helps other than aesthetically. But functionally, yeah, it serves no purpose. You know, I saw the doll there on the desk with the diodes connected to it, and I'm like, that's interesting. I just kind of let it go.
Yeah, like it didn't bug me, but it just made me think, was that purposely just like a homage cue that we're getting there?
Yeah.
And then I thought, I was like, oh man, maybe I missed something, and that's why the doll is hooked up, but apparently not.
Yeah. One thing that really bothered me about Vicaria's character, V, I'm just going to call her V for the rest of the episode, was the fact that she was endlessly intelligent when it came to death and the human body and things like that. But she was an absolute idiot when it came to thinking ahead, like having forethought. Like, what did she think was going to happen when she brought her monster back to life? She was so poorly prepared for that it bothered me. It's like, and that's why I think this is a world that doesn't have Mary Shelley in it. Because like I said, it seems like she was just learning everything, you know, as she went. I mean, even the realization of using the electricity, that didn't come from a book that she read. It came from watching some paramedics using a defibrillator on someone. And seeing that when they would give them an electrical charge, they would come back to life briefly, but then kind of fall back into unconsciousness. That's how she got the idea to use the electricity. So it just, like I said, I feel like this girl is as far as a scientific mind goes, she's a genius. But when it comes to just real world, even the whole thing with Kango, like taking the drugs, it's like, what the fuck are you thinking about? You're taking an entire bag of drugs that belongs to the biggest drug dealer, most ruthless motherfucker in your neighborhood, and you don't think they're going to come after you? I mean, are you stupid? I don't know. That whole I understand her point. I understand her mentality, because her brother died during a drug deal gone bad, because her father is now showing signs of drug addiction, everything else. But like I said, she has no forethought. She's not thinking ahead. Like, she comes up with the idea, but then she doesn't think about what I'm going to do after I execute that part of the idea. She did it with the bag of drugs. She did it with, the reanimation of the body. Just, very short-sighted, which bothers me because, like I said, she comes off as brilliant otherwise. But then, she is a teenager, and that's the thing that I kind of have to accept. Is even though, yes, she's absolutely brilliant, she's still a teenager, and she hasn't really lived that long of a life yet. She doesn't have that life experience of, Kango's going to put a bullet in my brain if they find out I took a bag of drugs from them. You know what I mean? So there's kind of that stuff that you have to kind of get through. Some of the poor decision making, the fact that she goes back to her lab right after leaving Kango's one night. I'm like, are you fucking stupid? Do you honestly not think he's following you? He still thinks you have his drugs. And you're going to leave his house and then go straight to where you got Chris. No, come on now. Yeah, this is what I mean. There's a little bit of suspension of disbelief here when it comes to V's, kind of street smarts, if you will. But ultimately, like I said, I do have to accept that she is a teenager. She's in high school. Even though she's a brilliant teenager, she's still a teenager. So I guess I answered my own question, sadly. But yeah, man, I felt like Kango and Jamal are like the true villains of this movie. I mean, in a true Frankenstein story, obviously we'll take the original as the example. It's Dr. Frankenstein who's the antagonist. He is the villain. The monster is not the villain. The monster is the victim. He's the victim of Dr. Frankenstein's, overzealousness and his God complex and everything else. In this one, they don't play it that way. Like, the monster, I can't tell if the monster is an antagonist or a protagonist. It's almost like it doesn't matter. And then V doesn't come off as like a selfish, mad scientist the way that, some of the Dr. Frankensteins from the past come off as. So I wasn't 100% sure what they were going for with her kind of personality. Like I said, equal parts brilliant and empty-headed all at the same time. It's kind of odd. But still, I mean, a pretty good character nonetheless. Like, I didn't hate her, not by any stretch. I hated some of the decisions that she made. I hated the fact that she didn't have very much forethought. But ultimately, she's still a likable character. And ultimately, this whole movie's filled with likable characters. I mean, her father, her sister-in-law, her aunt, her little cousin Jada, like everybody is somewhat likable. Even though I will say Jada was sometimes a little overly cryptic for a girl that young. I don't know if you guys felt that way, especially when she was talking to V about having seen Chris, and she's being way too cryptic for a 10 or 11-year-old. Like, I understand that kids can be evil geniuses, but yeah, that was a little bit over the top. And then her mad scientist laugh did kind of make me chuckle. V's mad scientist laugh. Because, yes, she actually does do the mad scientist laugh while she's sewing up her creature. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know if that was her just being hammy. But again, since I don't think Mary Shelley's Frankenstein exists in this world, what is she being hammy about? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So yeah, like I said, there's little parts of the movie that are going to leave you scratching your head. I think overall most people enjoy it. Like I said, I don't know that it's going to be anybody's favorite movie necessarily, but I'll take this over The Blackening anyway. I wish I'd have watched this on Juneteenth. That would have made more sense. All right, you guys got anything else to add before we go into the walkthrough?
I'm trying to think.
I don't think so. I mean, I agree the character is pretty hardened for her age. I know they're trying to say, because of the environment she's grown up in, and but yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you said. So I guess that adds nothing, but hey, I just thought I'd say I agree.
No, hey, that's valid. All right, well, let's get into it. not going to be much of a walkthrough. I just watched it the one time last night, and pretty much, I think I got the gist of it. But anyway, our movie opens up, and it's a voiceover from Vicaria. She's talking, and she's basically talking about some of the rough patches that she's had in her life. Starting with the death of her mother. Basically, her mother was hit by a stray bullet in the park one day, literally middle of the daytime, sitting on a park bench with V, watching V and her brother Chris playing in the playground, and literally a stray bullet goes right through her forehead and takes her out. So that's like the first tragedy of her life. And then, of course, her older brother Chris, ends up, of course, getting involved with Kango, the main drug dealer in this area, starts working for him, once he quits school, once he drops out of school, and promptly gets killed, one night when Kango basically sends him to kill some rival gang members. But instead they get the jump on Chris and they're able to kill him. So he then ends up getting killed. So, basically, and she continues her story also by talking about her father and how much she loves her father, but about how bad she feels for him because, in the span of a few years, he lost his wife, he lost his son, and now he himself is developing a drug addiction. We see multiple times in the movie, there'll be a crack pipe, the little glass pipe, she'll find it, like she found one in the garbage. At another point, she found a bag of crack in her father's bedroom, blah, blah, blah. So her life is shit, basically, is the point of the intro of this movie. But what ends up happening is the night of Chris's murder, she ends up taking the body. I'm not sure, I think they do say that it's only been a couple of months since Chris has been shot when the movie starts. But yeah, basically the night that Chris is shot, she snags the body. She basically drags it out of there. She ends up taking it to an empty unit, an empty storage unit in her facility that's next to an abandoned apartment. So she figures it's a safe area. And that's where she does all her Frankensteining, if you will. Yes, Frankenstein is now a verb. So yeah, she's doing all her Frankensteining in this little area. We don't really see, that's the thing too, that's another part of the movie that bothers me, is we don't really see a lot of what she's doing. Like we get like little silhouettes and shadows, and you might get a close-up on a piece of flesh or something, but you're not real sure what part of the body it is. We see extreme close-ups of her sewing the face back together. But it's so close that all you can really see are maybe some teeth. They definitely, the effects budget on this movie must not have been very high, or that's just not the style of movie they were going for. They weren't going for a gore fest, even though after watching this movie, I feel like it could have used a little bit more gore, especially in a world where they're kind of used to gore. I mean, think about the fact that in the span of this movie, V has watched 3 people get shot violently. To the point where like the one cop, his brains are hanging out of his head on the ground, and she's looking at it like it's everyday life. Like she's not gasping. She's not, freaked out. She's just looking at it like, yep, there's another dead body. Yet despite that, we don't really see a lot of gore in the lab. And apparently also, Chris's body isn't the only one that's been snagged. Apparently there is what the kids call the body snatcher, who is living, somewhere in the projects, and who is basically taking dead bodies, from crime scenes and whatnot. And we never see her do that, even though it's pretty obvious that it is V. We never actually see her partake in that, which again, that kind of bothers me, because you're showing the end results of her work, but you're not showing her get her hands dirty. Like, I want to see her drag those bodies, because, I mean, this is a teenage girl, mind you, and she's dragging full-grown dead male bodies, and not getting caught either. I mean, it's not like she has a gurney or something, at least not that they ever show us. So, we have to assume that she's literally dragging these bodies from the crime scene all the way back to her lab and somehow not getting caught. So, again, suspension of disbelief. So anyway, like I said, throughout the movie, we see her working in her lab. And then one day, she goes to her lab. She's always looking around. She's always looking over her shoulder, making sure that people aren't following her to her lab. One day she goes to her lab, and one of her neighborhood friends is there waiting for her, and he wants to go in. And he knows that she's doing some fucked up shit in there, but because she keeps it locked up and she has the only key, nobody really knows, other than the weird smell that's coming out of the room. It must not be strong enough for the whole neighborhood to smell it. You could probably only smell it when you're standing right next to the door. Anyway, she fucking decides to do that weird thing where people will tell the truth, but it sounds so over the top that the person they're talking to thinks they're being fucked with. So she literally tells the kid, oh, well, actually, I'm the body snatcher, and I've been taking bodies, and I've been sewing them back together, and I'm going to try to bring it back to life. She literally tells him exactly what she's doing. But then, of course, you know, because he's a normal kid, he's like, fuck it, whatever. You don't have to tell me. And he ends up leaving. He's the kid who actually ends up getting shot later by the police. I think he's shot by the police. Because
that's
the police
what it
were on the
sounds
scene.
Like.
Right? Yeah, because the police
Are you talking about when she heard it from like her bedroom? And,
exactly, and she goes outside and the cops are already there over his dead body.
That was another thing I kind of found interesting. So she's like stealing these like human bodies by herself and just drag her lab.
Exactly. It doesn't make any sense, but yeah, I mean, it's one thing if you try to do it, but how are you dragging these full-grown male bodies? You know, you're a girl of what, maybe 16, 17? I mean, she's still in high school. She hasn't graduated yet because she's still talking to the guidance counselor about colleges. So she's in high school. She's solidly in high school. Let's say at the absolute oldest, she's 17. And she's not a big girl, you know. She's not Venus Williams by any stretch. She's just an average size 17-year-old girl. But somehow she's dragging these bodies back to her lab, you know. And again, like I said, they don't show like a wheelbarrow or something that she might be using. We just have to accept it. We have to accept that she's the body snatcher. She's been taking all these bodies. And, you know, obviously as the movie viewer, we know what she's doing with the bodies, but nobody else really does. So anyway, back to the story. After she witnesses her friend get shot. She doesn't actually witness the shot, but she comes out of her house very soon after the shot goes off. She sees her friend lying on the ground. He's basically in the throes of death, and the paramedics put the defibrillator on him. They charge him up a couple of times. You know, they spark him a couple of times. He is able to come to twice, like literally when they hit the defibrillator, he actually comes to for like half a second, and he looks right at V, who's standing, you know, off to the side, but staring right at him. And he ends up staring back at her. They defibrillate him again. Again, he kind of comes to for half a second, but then finally he takes his last breath and, you know, has his death rattle, and he's gone forever. And at that moment is where she's like, oh shit, electricity. I could potentially use electricity to reanimate my creature. And literally that night she comes up with, like I said, this girl's a genius when it comes to, you know, science and mechanics, because she puts together a device that's able to transfer power from a power station, like a generator station, you know, one of those small fenced in areas. She's able to put a unit on the fence right there, and then it's wirelessly connected to another unit in her lab. So she's basically able to transfer power from that fenced in generator back to her lab. She ends up doing that, and of course, you know, she ends up reanimating her monster, which, if you haven't figured out by now, is indeed her brother Chris, who was shot and killed by the gang members. And you know, she talks about, you know, the reason that I'm assuming the reason that this is called The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster is because she does, in one particular scene, you know, talk about just how fed up she is with the whole situation of the gangs and the drugs and the death and everything that surrounds her. Excuse me. So she, you know, obviously she's trying to resurrect her brother Chris to try to help her father, because her father isn't handling Chris's death. You know, it was his only son. And, you know, I don't have any kids, but for a man who only has one son, you know, to lose that child, it's got to be devastating. I mean, it's devastating regardless. But like I said, men, you know, we think differently. So anyway, she resurrects Chris. Of course, Chris is this hulking beast now with hands twice as big as they were when he was alive. He actually, Chris actually had some really cool dreadlocks in life. So that look actually I did like for the monster. Like once he was reanimated, this thing walking around with a hood on and these dreadlocks coming down from inside the hood. I thought that actually looked really cool. Very Predator-like, if you will. Mildly Predator-like, anyway. So anyway, she reanimates Chris. Chris ends up attacking her because, of course, he's a reanimated corpse. He doesn't really know what's quite going on. Somehow he has the ability to scorch human flesh when he touches a person. So the only thing I can figure is that he's got so much electricity coursing through his veins and his body that when he touches someone, it literally burns their flesh, because he does it to multiple people in the movie. He grabs V by the arm, and that leaves a scorch mark on her arm for pretty much the rest of the movie. When he tries to attack Jamal and tries to strangle him, he leaves, the char marks around his neck, like he got burned, blah, blah, blah. So basically, everybody that he's touching, their flesh is burning on the spots that he's touching. What ends up happening is that's when V has the idea of using Chris almost as like an avenging angel for her. Whereas it almost seemed like she was planning on using him as an assassin to get rid of Kango and Jamal and, all the major gang members in the neighborhood. But on the first night, she decides, I'm just going to take their drugs. She knows where they stash their drugs. They stash them in a parked car slightly away from where they sell the drugs. So in case, cops bust them, blah, blah, blah. She has the monster kind of smash into the car, and she then takes the bag of drugs. But then just as she's about to leave the scene, one of Kango's lieutenants shows up and is like, what the fuck are you doing? He recognizes V right away. It's a small neighborhood. Everybody knows each other. He recognizes V right away and says, what the fuck are you doing? And then the monster notices, the gang member, who is armed, of course, has a gun. He ends up shooting at Chris a couple of times. Obviously, Chris is a zombie now, or, whatever you want to call him, Frankenstein monster. So the bullets have no effect on him. He ends up attacking. I think the guy's name is Curtis, is the first guy. Yeah, Curtis is the first guy that's attacked. He ends up not killing Curtis. He ends up sending him to the hospital. But before Curtis lost consciousness, he was able to tell Jamal that I was attacked by someone who was with V, and I think they stole our drugs, blah, blah, blah. So Kango, who's the leader, and Jamal, who I guess is like his, first lieutenant, his capo, if you will, basically can't prove that V took the drugs, but obviously on what Curtis said to them before he lost consciousness, they believe that she has the drugs, so they go after her. She ends up not giving up the drugs, not telling them that she even took them, basically playing dumb. She does kind of fuck up at one point, though, because during her interrogation, they ask her, who's the guy that you were with? At first, she says, I don't know. But then later in the interrogation, she fucks up and says, I don't know where he is, or I don't know when he's going to show up again. And Kango's like, all right, so there was somebody. So, she's caught in a lie right there. At that point, Kango decides to make her work for him. Not selling drugs, but actually like cutting up the bags of drugs, mixing the cocaine with the baby laxative and, getting the crack prepared, blah, 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 blah. She obviously doesn't want to do it because she's, a good scholastic, student. She has a future ahead of her and doesn't really want to get involved in drugs. Unfortunately, Kango doesn't give her a choice because, Kango has her father by the balls because he's the one selling the drugs to V's father. And that's the only authority figure V has in her life. So Kango is like, yeah, basically you work for me or I slit your throat with my machete. It's that simple. She doesn't really want to do it, obviously, and doesn't show up the very first night that she's supposed to. But then, like a day or two later, Jamal finally shows up at her house, drags her kicking and screaming back to Kango's, and she basically starts working. And then, that night she ends up leaving Kango's and literally going right back to her lab, right as Kango tells Jamal, follow her, make sure, you know what she's doing, blah, blah, blah. Actually, it wasn't Jamal the first time. It was Jamal the second time. It was somebody else that he sent to follow her the first night when she went back to the lab. Of course, she gets back to the lab, and the lab has been broken into. The door is completely busted off, so obviously her monster is now out on the loose. But just as this person who's following her also arrives, the monster, Chris, shows up and basically takes that guy out, so he's completely out. The next day, her and her father are invited to a dinner at her aunt's house because basically Chris was engaged to be married to this girl, and he had gotten her pregnant. So this girl's pregnant. So the girl that was supposed to be with Chris is pregnant. She's about to have Chris's baby. So obviously the two families are still tight, even though, well, tight might be a stretch, but they still kind of congregate together. They end up going out to dinner, not going out, but having dinner at the aunt's house, at Chris's family, not at Chris's family's house, at Chris's baby mama's family's house, if you will. And basically that night while she's there, Jada, her little cousin, basically says, I saw Chris. I talked to him. Obviously, V doesn't believe her because, V is like, well, Chris is a monster. How the hell could this little girl have spoken to her? And then she even says, I even know where he's staying. And she points to the apartment next door, which has been abandoned. It's all boarded up and fucked up. And there's a hole in the wall peeking through into the next apartment. V ends up sneaking over there, trying to see if she can find Chris, but Chris isn't there. She ends up looking through the peephole, and then Jada looks back at her and says, did you find Chris? And she's like, nope, he's not here. Mind you, V is taking this very well. The fact that this child just told her that I saw your Frankenstein monster, she's taking it very well. Like, she's not freaking out. She's just kind of trying to see what Jada knows and what she doesn't know. Eventually, the next day or that night, she ends up, like I said, going over to that abandoned apartment. While she's leaving the apartment, once again, Jamal finds her, grabs her, and drags her back to Kango's place to do her work for the evening. And once again, as soon as she leaves Kango's place, again, she decides to go right back to that apartment where Chris potentially may be hiding. And of course, Jamal is following her that night. And so she ends up going back there. Jamal ends up following her. Obviously, Jamal ends up getting attacked by Chris. Chris doesn't kill Jamal, but he does, get those, the char marks around his neck where he tried to strangle him. And at the same time, V took the bag of drugs that she had hidden and took them home with her. That night, she's home trying to decide what to do with the bag of drugs. And Chris ends up showing up at her bedroom window. When she notices Chris at the window, she screams, blah, blah, blah. Her dad runs in. I'm sorry, folks. I got the hiccups. Excuse me. Like I said, after she screams, her dad kind of runs in, says, is everything okay? She says, yeah, there was somebody at my window, but he's gone now. It's no big deal. Dad offers to go outside to check out the situation. She instantly tells him, no, stay right here. There's no need to go outside. Because she's worried that because at this point, Chris has attacked pretty much everyone that's been in his presence other than Jada. How Jada has survived not getting attacked is beyond me, but I guess he doesn't attack children. Let's see. So where are we at this point? At this point, once again, somehow V ends up back at Kango's place, and she actually brings back the drugs. She actually decides to give the drugs back to him and says, here are the drugs. I found them. Now leave me and my family alone. I don't want to work for you, and I don't want you selling this shit to my father anymore. while they're having their little back and forth, Jamal ends up getting a phone call from the hospital and letting him know that Curtis has just died. So Curtis is now dead. And earlier in the film, Jamal flat out said, if Curtis dies, I'm killing your ass. And he's saying this to V, like I said, who's a fucking teenager. So obviously they have no limitations on who they're willing to kill.
Yeah, as if she had like direct involvement in that too. It's like she's just a kid. What do you think she had to do with it?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like she strangled Curtis and sent him to the hospital, but you know, Jamal's one of those guys that's gonna believe what he wants to believe. So there you go. So anyway, he ends up wanting to attack V, but Kango stops him, and the reason Kango stops him is because that's when we find out that they're not actually at Kango's house. They're at Kango's grandmother's house, because we actually see him caring for his grandmother, who's maybe not quite bedridden, but she obviously doesn't get out of the house very often. Like I said, this is the first time we see her. So he's trying to get Jamal to shut up. He's like, you know, literally, you got to be quiet. You know, grandma's literally, I mean, he doesn't quite say this, but, you know, obviously Jamal knows why he's telling him to be quiet. Jamal just goes crazy. He's just like, fuck you, I'm killing this girl. You know, she had something to do with Curtis getting killed. I don't even give a fuck. I'm taking her out. Kango actually comes to V's kind of assistance and tries to stop Jamal and says, no, we ain't killing her. You know, we still don't know 100% what's going on. Jamal gets upset that Kango is now defending V. And fucking Jamal pulls a Friday the 13th Part 2 on Kango and buries his machete right into his shoulder. Same shoulder that Jason had the machete buried into his shoulder. Just a really gnarly little machete attack. V is able to get out of the house, you know, while Jamal and Kango are kind of, you know, struggling to fight. Eventually, she ends up going home. V ends up going home, and unfortunately, her father ended up finding Chris in the house, and Chris pretty much attacked him right away. It wasn't quite right away. It seemed like Chris maybe did recognize his father briefly, but after that brief moment, he just ends up attacking his father anyway and killing him, leaving the charred flesh marks around his neck once again. So when V comes home, the first thing she finds is her father, literally her last family member, dead on the floor. She starts to freak out. She starts screaming. At that exact moment, we hear the front door open, and she thinks, oh shit, Chris is back. But then the camera pans around the corner, and we see that it's Jamal, still with his machete in his hand, basically still looking for V. He goes to attack V, and just as he's literally has the machete reared up and is going to bring it down on V, fucking Kango shows up and saves the day of all people. He's able to stop Jamal long enough so that eventually Chris does show up. And then Chris ends up getting the upper hand on Jamal. He ends up disarming him, taking his machete away, and burying it in his mouth. He basically gives him a Glasgow smile. You know, the Joker smile, as you know, as we know, that scar, the smiley scar, basically buries the machete into his mouth and pushes down onto his head. I thought he was going to go all the way and just, you know, do the complete decapitation, but no, again, this isn't that movie. He kind of stops short, you know, just past the cheeks. Jamal does end up keeling over dead from, I'm assuming, from loss of blood. And basically the machete just stays right there in his face for the rest of the movie. Every time we see Jamal, the machete is stuck there. At this point, Chris then attacks Kango, and mind you, Kango has his shoulder just torn open from that machete attack, and he's somehow still able to struggle and keep Chris at bay. Eventually, they're able to get into one of the side rooms and close the door. And they're both trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Which is an interesting dichotomy to actually see Kango being, I don't want to say on the side of good, but he's helping V. He's trying to help her out and, you know, take care of this Frankenstein monster situation that she got herself into. She decides, wait a minute, if I brought him back to life with electricity, maybe an even bigger burst of electricity could potentially kill him. But she says, I need those two, pieces of machinery that I made, the one that gets attached to the power station generator and then the one that gets attached wirelessly to the lab. One is in her room right there in her house where they are currently. The other one is still at the lab. And the one at the lab is the one that she needs to put at the power station. The one that is at the house is the one that she needs in the lab. So basically, she runs out the bedroom window and goes to the lab directly. Kango then goes up to her room to find the piece of machinery that she's looking for. She describes it to him, and he's able to get up there and grab it. She is then able to get to the lab and, get the one part that she needs. Unfortunately, just as she's about to leave the lab, she gets a knock at the door. Like a knock at the lab door, like a big menacing knock, excuse me. She opens the little sliding window to see who's outside, and there's no one there for a second. But then Kango's face gets slammed into the fucking door, right into the opening, and it looks like it's covered in glass, like there's broken glass all in it. We don't see the actual monster at this point. We just see Chris's head get slammed into the door. She then opens the door. Again, like a fucking absolute genius. She opens the door, and luckily Chris is gone already, again, I should say. And she sees Kango's body, and she sees that, he's got glass all up in his face, and he's dead. He's deader than shit. And she actually has kind of an emotional moment right there. Like, she actually is taken aback, and she's kind of staring at Kango's body. I don't know if, maybe because Kango was like the authority figure of the neighborhood, maybe seeing him dead on the ground was, kind of shocking or jarring or whatever. But yeah, she actually does take a moment and kind of stares at his dead body. Eventually, she is able to get the one part back to the power station and get that hooked up. Then she gets back to the lab with the other part, sets that up, and then she sets up a trap for Chris where the little gurney stand, the adjustable stand that she had him on when she first brought him to life, she basically has that set up right at the front door. So as soon as Chris walks in the front door, the first thing he's going to run into is the gurney. And it seems like the plan actually works pretty well because Chris does exactly what she expects. He walks in the door and he walks right into the gurney, and she hits the power button and she fries the shit out of him, again, for the second time. And this time it seems like he's going to stay down. And I think he kind of does, right? Does he get up again, or was that the end of it? I think that was it. I think he stays down after that power attack, that second power attack. At that point, that's right.
Because it was after they ask him what his name is, and he says monster, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's after that. So as Chris dies permanently now, he's on the ground. Jada was there the whole time. Jada was in the lab. And this is where we get, and I call this the Dexter season 4 ending, where Jada basically walks up to V and says, well, can you bring my family back now? And Jada's like, what? What are you talking about? As it turns out, the monster had already visited Jada's family and killed everyone. It killed his baby mama, his unborn child, the aunt, everybody who was at that dinner party that day, not counting the dad because the dad died at his house. V's dad died at his house. But yeah, everybody else in the in-laws family are all dead on the ground. V starts to cry. Jada's like, well, you can bring him back, can't you? You did it with Chris. You can bring him back. And she's like, no. And I'm actually applauding V at this point. I'm like, yes, don't do it. Tell this little girl, no, I can't do it because they're just going to come back like Chris. But then she has her Louis Creed moment where Jada says, but they just died. They're still fresh. This is what I mean about Jada being a little bit too intelligent and cryptic for her own good. This girl's like a 10-year-old girl, and she's like, well, you can bring them back because they're fresh. And then V actually, you can see the gears in her head start to turn, and she's like, oh, yeah, they're fresh. I might be able to actually do something. So what she ends up doing is she ends up taking the body of her aunt, or not her aunt, but her, cousin-in-law or sister-in-law, that's the proper term. the pregnant girl. She basically takes the pregnant girl back to her lab and tries the experiment again, does the electricity, shuts it off, and then waits for a couple of seconds. And lo and behold, she fucking wakes up. She wakes up and she's speaking. And literally, V is like, "What's your name? What is your name? Tell me what your name is." And the girl says correctly what her name is, that, she's about to have Chris's baby. And then instantly she's like, "My baby's still alive." Like, she can still feel her baby kicking. And literally, the sister-in-law looks at V and says, "So where's everybody else?" And then the movie ends with V looking at her and saying, "Oh, they'll be here soon." And that's it. A Frankenstein movie with somewhat of a happy ending. I'm kind of surprised.
She's going to raise her undead hood.
Yeah, it is odd that, unlike Pet Sematary, with Creed thinking that his wife's body was fresh and that she would come back better. Excuse me. She has the same idea, but it actually works this time. Go figure.
Yeah, it's almost like an open-ended, like, are they trying to make it seem hopeful? Because when she wakes back up, she seems pretty normal, but what we don't get is, like, the aftermath. It's like, but is there something about coming back to life after death that will actually end up making her sinister, or did she cure the disease of death? It's like,
right.
It almost
not
alludes.
Expressly said, yeah.
Yeah, it's not 100% for certain, only because we only get that very brief moment at the end of her waking up, so it's hard to say for sure. Like, is there an innate sinister streak to anyone that comes back from the dead, or is it because her first experiment was on, like, basically like a Frankenstein gangster almost,
Yeah, exactly. She started with a gangster and she added gangster parts to it. I guess you can't be too surprised that she created a killing machine,
Yep.
But yeah, there you go. The most subdued Frankenstein movie I've ever seen. And like I said, my walkthrough didn't do the movie justice. When I say that the majority of this movie is spent with the human characters and the gangs and the drug dealers and everything, I am legitimate. Like, 3/4 of the movie is just all ghetto and housing project, like, drama. Like I said, as I said earlier, and I still feel this way, it feels like the Frankenstein part of this movie is the B story. And the A story is just the horrors of living in the ghetto, living as a poor person, trying to get by in a world, not meant for them to succeed, blah, blah, blah. So, like I said, not a bad movie. Like, there's nothing that I can put my finger on and say, oh, this was bad or that was bad. It's just one of those things where I just wish it was a little more. I wish it was a little bit more, solidly in the horror genre. I wish there was a little bit more gore, maybe a little bit more with her creating the monster. Because like Mike said earlier, the creation of Chris is like in the first act. It's like we don't spend a lot of time with her in the lab doing mad scientist stuff, which is kind of what we want to see in a Frankenstein movie. We want to see the body snatching, the reconnection of body parts, blah, 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 all the different surgeries that have to be done. They definitely went with more of a gritty crime drama feel with this one, which, like I said, for some people won't be a bad thing. I can see a lot of people really loving this movie. But just for me, it was just, it could have been a little more, that's all. Minor complaint.
Yeah.
Same here.
Real disagreement from me.
Yep.
Yeah, like I said, I was wanting it to be more, and it just turned into a drama fantasy thing about what's going on, and I was just losing interest with it.
Yeah, I hear you.
Cool. All right. Well, that's gonna wrap up this episode. But let's find out where else we can hear everybody. So Venom, I'll throw it right back to you.
All right. So as I mentioned on the last episode, we did go ahead and record Creature Comforts episode 18, I think. Are we on 18? It's 17 or 18.
Close
it's
enough.
One of those.
Close enough.
Yeah, exactly. where we did go ahead and look at the latest creature feature release from Thailand called The Lake. I know it's one that a lot of people have been talking about. We finally got a chance to check that out and talk about it. That episode probably won't be out till late this week, early next week, as I'm kind of busy this week. So my editing time is going to be fairly limited, but it should be out at the latest a week from today. So look out for that. And then that's pretty much it as far as any movement goes on our shows. The main show, episode 53, should be getting recorded in the next week or so. And same thing with all our other shows. Crystal Lake Gift Shop, hopefully you'll get something going soon enough. And obviously you can always count on fresh cuts for an episode every week. So yeah, pretty much still kind of recovering from my flu, so haven't podcasted as much lately, but that'll change soon with the summer.
All right, let's go over to Dawn. What do you got, Dawn?
Yeah, so as mentioned, we have Creature Comforts, which was a fun time. It should be out soon. Still waiting on the eternal, Stu World Order show with Red 2 and Road to Nowhere with a triple bill of Fulci. Have recorded 2 guest commentaries, one with NFW where we start our Shark Week episodes. Although we didn't technically do Shark Movie this time, it was memorial for Treat Williams with, as you guessed, Deep Rising. And I also did a guest spot with Lacey for the House of Wax remake with Nudie as well. So that one, both those were a lot of fun. Should be out hopefully sooner than my previous recorded guest spots. But yeah, other than that, the only other thing is the latest episode of the Horror Countdown, where I ended up talking with production designer Mick Strawn about his working career, where we look back at 10 of our favorite films of his, which was pretty fun. It's an unconventional one where we weren't so much counting down our favorites. It was more, these are my favorites, tell me a funny story about what happened on the set of each one. So if you want some behind the scenes stories about all of the films that he's worked on, I guess that's your show. So it's not the 2.5 hour behemoth that the last episode was, but yeah, hopefully it'll be a fun time, and you'll get to know something about some of the stuff he's worked on. So yeah, I guess like I said, just waiting on the recorded episodes I have to come for me.
All right. As far as I go, I know I brought it up, but finally it's been posted, and I spoke with Lacey, so she's going to be doing the official post for it tomorrow, which will be a Tuesday morning, but it's already actually up to listen to if you have like Spotify or whatever other podcasting listening apps, and that would be my guest spot on Slumber Party Massacre, where we talked about franchise sequels that jumped the shark. So check that out. It was a really fun episode. And now that it's finally out, I can stop mentioning it every show that it might be out. So yeah, that's.
I wish I had your luck.
And then yeah, other than that, we'll be looking to schedule our other stuff soon. Let's see, Crystal Lake Gift Shop. That's probably. I would assume that's the easiest one to schedule. The least amount of prep, and it doesn't take a long time to even record those episodes, so we'll get on that. And then I was actually thinking, like, right at the beginning of recording this, is like, oh, I need to go hit up the No More Room in Hell thread just to see what everyone's thoughts are on our next good date for that. But other than that, yeah, that's it for me. As far as fresh cuts goes, I think we have is next week. Do we hit July next week?
Yeah, next week.
Yeah, no, actually not to the weekend. So I don't know if something opens up on June 30th. No. Do you know?
No, nothing opens June 30th.
No, I think the next one is next Friday. That's Sidious 2. Yep. Sidious 5. Sorry.
5. Yeah.
Wow, 5. I would have never thought we'd have 5 Insidious films, but we do. So yeah, that'll be the next theatrical release.
I thought we'd have 5 Conjuring films before Insidious.
That's valid. Yes.
Probably. Yeah, I
But the
definitely.
Conjuring universe is way more expanded, though. I mean, they've got all the side movies
Yeah.
that keep coming out. I think The
Yeah,
Nun
but
2 is the next one.
The Nun too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying, I mean, 3 Annabelles, 2 nuns, partridge in a pear tree. What's the other one?
Yeah.
Good Man. That one fall through, or
Which one? Crooked Man? I don't
Good Man.
know.
I'm saying, did that one fall through, or
I don't know.
I never heard that
I haven't
it fell
heard of
through.
anything on that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's weird.
But anyways, yeah, we'll look for
yeah.
something on VOD. Yeah, we've had plenty of stuff release recently, and there's probably going to be more stuff releasing this week. That's just how it goes on VOD. So we will figure something out and get another episode of Fresh Cuts out next week. So until then, thank you everybody for listening to the show. We will catch you next time. Let's say bye to our listeners.
Later.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Don't steal bodies to bring them back to life, please. Leave them dead. So I guess sometimes dead is better still holds true, even through non-Pet Cemetery movies. Peace.